So if you've got a youth player, a young player, and you tell a young player you are talented, what are the effects or the negative effects that you're seeing when that's been said to them?
If we think about the things that actually matter in long-term athlete development, it's continued persistent engagement with the task over time, right? Nobody starts out with the tools that they need to be an elite performer in any sport at the adult level. The only way they acquire those is through constant engagement. And what we found with telling people that they're talented, you can actually undermine the psychology needed for that constant engagement, because they think, well, I don't have to train as hard because I'm talented. That's, for me, the most negative implication of using that word, is it undermines the actual thing that we need people to do, which is even if you have the most talent in the world, you still need to work hard. You still need to train. You still need to put in your 10 years of engagement in order to acquire the skills you need at the adult level. And so for me, that's the negative implication of using that word, is you're undermining the very process that the system is designed to promote.
But isn't there an argument that as well, if you are using it, you are then trying to enhance the development of that person that you've essentially already earmarked as talented? I mean, we've had Dr. Adam Kelly on as well talking about relative age effects. You've done work in relative age effects. So if we're creating this sort of Matthew effect of athletes that are identified as talented, they then get the opportunity to unlock that potential. The argument is the ones that we are missing and leaving behind.
Yeah, and this is the double-edged sword that people in sport have to deal with, is that we don't have unlimited resources to keep everyone. That would be the perfect scenario, is we never have to make that decision. But the reality is that we have to make that decision. Coaches have to do that every season. But I think there's power in the way that we frame that decision. So if I was, let's use our 9-year-old example again. If I tell you you're not talented versus, we had to select 20 players for our team, and unfortunately you weren't in that top 20. And here's what we used to make those decisions. Here's where you scored high. Here's where you scored low. I want you to work on these things and come back next year. That's a different message than you don't have talent, right? And so, I think there's a certain type of athlete who will get that feedback and be motivated by it to prove you wrong, and I was one of these athletes, just fueled by spite to prove people wrong, that when they made conclusions about my talent or my capabilities. We could design a system where those kinds of athletes are actually, they actually flourish with the response that we give them. But we don't. We look at talent as if it's this fixed binary sort of outcome, but we know it's more complicated than that. We know that because of the lack of predictive ability of our early talent decision-making and how poor they actually are at predicting long-term success. At the same time, we know that the things that predict early performance are not good predictors of later performance. The performance indicators are completely different.
I've thought about this for a little while. The mechanism that is making a different individual who is presented with that message, you're not talented, you're not good enough, and even just leaving it there, because I think if you were to, following on from, say, someone like Carol Dweck, who would argue all you got to do is just add the word yet on the end. If someone is just presented with that message, you're not talented enough, you're not good enough, I'm so interested as to the paths that people diverge upon, and the ones that, like you said, yourself, and I even put myself in this path of trying to prove someone wrong, and then the other path being people just falling to that categorization and characterization of themselves and self-fulfilling any prophecy that is down that road as well. And what is that mechanism that's guiding those two paths?
It's such an important question for the way that we design and deliver sport, but it's a research area that we've tried to operationalize for almost 10 years now, but the ethical implications of how you would even conduct the study are so concerning that we don't even think we'd be able to run the study because of how powerful these words are.
What are some of the ethical implications? Like what would that look like?
Well, just think about the design, right? You bring in a bunch of U11 kids, and you want to give them those words. You want to use those words with kids and say, you know what, you're not talented. It's hard to remove the power of that word from that child, and so the ethical implications for their long-term development probably wouldn't allow you to run the study in the first place.
I get that. I wonder if there's anything in social psychology and even in the downstream effects of people who have, whether it's had unsupporting parents or just had negative experience after experience thrown at them. And I even know that there was, I think it was, Daniel Gould's paper on Olympians around the characteristics of personality traits in Olympic athletes, that one characteristic that was for sure was they'd had a negative experience happen to them very early on in life, but then it was a cascade of events. And even from then you can start to look at, say, Bounce and Matt Syed's book about the cascading events that happen after event after event. But there's probably something in social psychology around there being the negative impact early on in life and the sort of maladaptive behaviors that happen downstream.
Yeah, and I think so. That I don't think that was Dan's project. I think that was the Great British Medalist study that showed that they'd had that sort of early childhood traumatic event. Yeah. And I don't know that we have a good understanding of what the power of that is from a social psychological standpoint, but we can see that in other fields as well. You know, the elite special forces in the UK use the acronym GRIT, but not in the way that not in the sort of Duckworth sense of the word. They use it as gained resiliency and training. And so they put people in situations that allow them to either demonstrate or acquire the kind of resiliency they need later in their jobs. So that's why the SEAL training is so intense. It's not because they get something out of the intensity. It's because of the resiliency that they learn through surviving the experience. I kind of like that idea, but I don't know how we, other than sport is going to find your area of weakness regardless, because that's what sport does, right? It's designed to find where you need to improve, whether that's in a skill sense or a personal psychological characteristic sense. It's kind of the job of sport to find out, well, competitive sport anyway, to find out where your limitations are. And so, the Great British Medalist study, I wrote a response to that when the paper came out, sort of challenging what we do with that information, right? Like, are you trying to say that we need to add more trauma to the lives of kids? I don't think that's the takeaway. I think it's, well, what do we need to understand about the characteristics that really elite performers need to have in order to thrive in that kind of system? And recognizing just how unique high performance sport is as a system and the kinds of traits and characteristics that it's going to need people that are successful in that system to have.
If you've enjoyed that clip, then you might enjoy the full unedited version of this episode. All you got to do is click right here. Go on, go.